They say the road at night is quiet, but sometimes it's too quiet. Jeff thought it would be just another lonely drive, until he saw the light. A forgotten bar, a strange name, and a story no one wanted to tell, but everyone feared. What started as a simple stop for coffee turned into something else entirely, something darker, something that doesn't care whether you believe or not, because it's already watching. So tell me, when was the last time you questioned what's real?
Driving was going to be just another exhausting night. Under a sky that seemed to have forgotten how to shine, there was another expanse of chilly asphalt. Jeff, who was 27 years old, was already sick of everything. The loneliness that accompanied the road, the years of boredom, and the incessant drone of the motor. It was particularly quiet that night. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that adds weight rather than tranquility. It pushes at your chest, your ears, and the recesses of your mind. He noticed a flash of light at 11:22 p.m. yellowish, dim, hardly visible in the shadow. An old bar. In the forgotten areas of the United States, one of those roadside ghosts that refuses to go away. It didn't seem appropriate for that location or era. It appeared as though it had just appeared, but it also seemed to have been there all along. Jeff stopped, more out of fatigue than interest. It was louder than it should have been when his tires crunched on the gravel. He entered. It was the fragrance of overbrewed coffee and pie that had seen better days that hit him first, a stale, somewhat bitter warmth. There were many stories in the air, the kind that nobody really tells. An elderly man, perhaps 68, stood at the counter. His calm voice belied sharp gaze. "Name tag," McCabe said, like someone who had witnessed this situation more times than he could count. His nod was straightforward yet filled with silent knowledge. There were murmurs floating around the room. Travelers and truck drivers share the same expression. They are overly knowledgeable but underspoken. After ordering a coffee and the final piece of pie, Jeff took a seat. The atmosphere then changed. Focus instead of volume. The thin, misleading hush curled around him. Not because he said anything, however, because he was present. The stories began at that point, not because they were requested. Like pressure hissing from a valve, they just appeared. Absences. Individuals who disappeared without a trace. Others discovered, or what was left of them, lacking something, parts, not thing, brains specifically, removed as precisely as a human could. That's what they said, anyway. Jeff rolled his eyes, smiled, and offered the obvious explanation. A serial killer, of course. Not a monster, just a disordered mind. However, nobody shared his laughter. Nobody even blinked, in fact. The temperature dropped. An unseen change occurred in the way they gazed at him. Then, like a secret no one wanted to keep any longer, the name came out. The rider without a face. They said it wasn't a legend. Folklore, no. A present. An incredulous hunter. He had no desire for vengeance. He didn't seek justice either. He looked for skeptics, people who made fun of the unknown. He also gave instances of them. Tall, hooded, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a battered trench coat. No face, no mask, just nothing. Where a face should be, there is a gap. And he didn't chase after him when he arrived. He asserted, silently, calmly. After that, nothing remained. Jeff chuckled once again, this time louder. An uncompromising, ardent atheist. He had no dread of heaven or damnation. Spirits, ghosts, stories for kids. It's all nonsense, he said. McCabe, however, did not dispute, made no attempt to persuade him. He merely grinned. That's how they like them, she remarked, with a skewed, worn-out smile that sounded more like a farewell. People who don't have faith or fear. Jeff didn't want to express how much it shook him. He paid his tab, got up, and turned to go. However, a powerful, desperate hand clamped down on his shoulder. A trucker pleaded with him to wait in a tremulous voice. Only until 4 a.m., the moment the rider vanishes, the moment when the night breathes its last and the living continue to live. Jeff withdrew, irritated and incredulous. He then departed, Mr. McCabe added softly. And there goes another young man with a bright future, after merely glancing at Jeff's vehicle. The road greeted Jeff's return with a cold breath and wide arm. Everything appeared normal at first, or as unremarkable as a highway at 2 in the morning. Then the static appeared. The radio stopped working. Quiet. No signal. No music. Again, just stillness. But this time it was more profound, heavier. Jeff cursed the salesman for selling him crap since he believed his car was breaking down. He was still disturbed by the silence, though, as if someone was now paying attention. He was furious and said that he didn't believe in ghosts and that the men at the pub were just crazy. However, Jeff's rage toward the dealership was heightened when the radio started making odd noises once more. Then there was stillness once more. Then a voice, ragged, unbelievable, like a whisper from the soil. It crept through the speaker. "It's not the vehicle. It's me. The one you don't trust. I'm going to go after you now." Jeff stopped. He clutched the steering wheel. He quickly glanced at the rearview mirror. Nothing at first. Then something happened. A black silhouette that was tough to measure from a distance. A rotting horse that breathes like a furnace. The rider on top of it. Tall, hill, observing, anonymous, simply being there. The kind that ingrains itself into your subconscious. The whisper followed, not from the radio anymore, from within the vehicle, perhaps from within his own mind. "Don't be concerned. I also don't think you're real, and nobody will when I'm finished." Jeff pressed the accelerator hard. He wasn't driving, though. He was running away. Furthermore, the road was no longer extended. It bowed, twisted. The trees grew closer. The lights went off. Time passed. Hooves were the only remaining sound. Rhythmic, steady, nearer. The quest was on. Belief turns into money out there, in that never-ending night where reason breaks down and shadows appear. And Jeff paid in terror, with no money. He searched for reason, but all he could find was fear. Because doubt is an invitation rather than a sign of weakness on that path. He didn't yell. Screaming suggests that you believe someone may hear you. All he did was drive, by way of the whispers, the cold, and the fog, and he glanced back every now and then, not to be safe, for verification, to check for the rider's presence. He was always, and there, where incredulity is lethal, one reality emerges: the road is unforgiving. Darkness never forgets, and the people who make fun of the myth, they vanish because they were correct, not because they were mistaken. And the rider continued to ride, silent, unrelenting, and sure of what he had come to believe, someplace far behind Jeff's engine's roar, through the dense, black curtain of the empty. Jeff's eyes scanned the road with a desperation that didn't quite match the vacant roads ahead. His knuckles white on the steering wheel, and his breath was shallow. The noise of the engine was not as loud as the pounding of his heart in his ears. He made an effort to bring his thoughts back to reason, logic, or whatever he knew every second that went by. This cannot be taking place. It was not taking place. There must have been a reason. It was always there. It must have been a joke, a ruse. Perhaps the men behind the bar had set up a snitch, tracked him, and employed drones, speakers, and other cutting-edge technology. Yes, that was logical, in a way. Perhaps McCabe and his team enjoyed playing pranks on strangers. Perhaps they had done this to other passengers as well, concocted a spooky tale, played a few noises on the radio, and then watched the terror emerge from the darkness. He tried to grasp the concept like a lifeline with a forced, hollow laugh. He persuaded himself that was all there was to it. A complex joke. However, the laughter ended nearly immediately, because something inside of him refused to believe it, even when he tried to. Something chilly, something primordial. It was the kind of instinct that could not be overcome by education or reason. This was no joke, it murmured. No gimmick. No machine could bend the earth in that way or cool the air in that way. Nevertheless, he held with the explanation since there was no other option. Not possible. The voice then resurfaced, unambiguous. "Be calm. Close. You're still trying to explain me away, aren't you, Jeff?" Jeff's eyes widened abruptly. Like a trapped animal, his heart pounded in his chest. This time, the voice wasn't in the speakers. He wasn't in the rear. He wasn't surrounded by it. He had it in him. "You believe this to be a joke, an arrangement. Some elderly folks who have nothing better to do." The tone was amused, not sarcastic, but the kind of amusement that results from knowing something that the other person. There will inevitably be something. Everyone believes that. Initially, as though he could shake the voice from his mind, Jeff gave a forceful shake of his head. Even though the speedometer was already approaching the brink, he mumbled, "Get out of my head," and pressed harder on the throttle. "You're not real." For a single breath, there was silence. Then came the reply, cooler, gentler this time. "Oh, Jeff, I'm really real. For the time being." Like fog, the words lingered in the atmosphere. Jeff's face flickered with surprise as he blinked. More to himself than anybody else, he muttered. "For the time being? Yes, for the time being. I was real once, you see. Flesh, identity, voice. However, faith is a delicate thing, and you fade when you lose the faith of others. From existence, then from memory. Myth is all that remained. Dust. Midnight whispers in a diner. You believe me to be a monster. However, I am only the result of uncertainty burying the truth." Jeff's hold relaxed a bit. Even though the road ahead was still deserted, something felt off, as though he was driving forward but not getting anywhere, as if time itself had become erratic. "That's your future, Jeff," the voice went on, now soft. "You'll be a tale, a caution. On the list of people who didn't believe was another name. For a little while longer, you will remain authentic. But you'll be forgotten when I'm finished. Similar to me." Jeff felt a surge of lightheadedness. He blinked vigorously, attempting to focus his mind. That wouldn't sit well with him. He was unable to. He refused to allow fear to change the truth. He had always trusted what he could see, feel, and demonstrate. Reason was the foundation of his life. About the fact, whatever this monster was, it was playing tricks and taking advantage of people's fear. All the legends did that. They preyed on gullible people. He wasn't weak, though. With greater resolve now, he mumbled, "You're not going to get inside my head. I have no faith in you. I won't." A pause occurred. A long, drawn-out silence. Then, "Jeff, I don't need your belief. I already understand your fear." There were flickering headlights. The world in front of him disappeared for a moment, barely more than a breath. The road was completely engulfed in darkness. Then it came back. However, the terrain had shifted just a little. Gently. The trees were too near. Too quiet in the skies. The moon is no longer there. What about the road? It no longer felt like a path. It had the feel of a trap, a circle. Jeff applied the brakes firmly. The car didn't immediately stop even though the tires squealed. Too long, it slid, like though the tarmac had liquefied underfoot. Jeff sat there, breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling as if he had just run miles, until it eventually stopped. In the rearview mirror, he looked. Nothing. Not a horse. No rider. Just dark. "However, I'm not behind you anymore." Jeff gasped. "I'm approaching. I'm nearly inside. And after I am, Jeff won't be important. There will only be the myth left." His fists were shaking as he clenched his teeth. He said again, "You're not real." A catchphrase, a shield, a final line of protection against whatever this might be. "You're not real." But even as he spoke, the cold, relentless reality continued to nudge at the back of his consciousness. There are some things that are obvious. When you deny something, it becomes real. What about the rider? He had already arrived. With a deep, raspy sound like to metal scraping stone, the laughter began low. However, it didn't originate in one location. It got out. Initially through the speakers, then through the car's floor, doors, and even Jeff's own breath. Every inch of the planet seemed to be laughing at him, as though it had turned into a mouth. The voice dragged each sentence like a person enjoying a delicious piece of meat as it said, "Ah, how I love these atheists. It's always such fun to watch how they melt from the inside when they realize the supernatural has always been real." Cold sweat trickled down the back of Jeff's neck as he swallowed hard. "Yes, Jeff, you are correct. The paranormal has always existed. In actuality, the fantasy exists in your universe." The tone changed, becoming more acerbic and brimming with contempt. "Your tiny universe is filled with ridiculous technologies and toys designed to mimic the abilities of the creator alone. Artificial illumination to conceal the actual gloom. Networks, circuits, flying machine, the appearance of control. It's just cheesy imitation of a power that is beyond your comprehension. The world that is natural, the natural is pitiful. Do you not think?" With his eyes fixed on the road, Jeff bit his lip. He was unwilling to respond. He didn't want to contribute to the discussion. However, his most dependable companion, Fury, spoke for him. "And is that correct, in your opinion?" are you doing this? Tracking down the unbelievers? Torturing people for having a different perspective? The laughter came back, louder this time. More teasing. Jeff, not believing is not the sin. Denying the truth out of pride and greed is sin. It's believing that you are too smart to bow down, too developed to be afraid. You claim to be enlightened, yet you are blind. The voice thickened like smoke and grew deeper. The devil, who laughs when no one believes in him, is not like me. Furthermore, I am not like the carpenter who endures hardship when others ignore him. I'm not grinning. I'm not in pain. I detest. And the unbelieving suffer as a result. Jeff, because hate is not symbolic. It's real, and it's drawing nearer. The automobile was suddenly silent, the kind of quiet that precedes a storm. Then it started. The noise, the hoof beat, like a recollection at first. Then, like the sound of 1,000 hearts hitting the sidewalk. More volume, nearer, unrelenting, drive. Although the command was quiet, it had a thunderous impact. Jeff did as he was told. The speedometer soared. The engine howled in anger as the needle buried itself in the red. The blacktop was yelled at by the tire. It didn't matter, though. Due to the fact that the hoofbeats remained constant, they didn't slow down. They didn't pursue. They won. It seemed as though the horse was in the air surrounding him rather than behind him. Jeff didn't even give a damn by this point, not as he had previously. Perhaps it was fatigue, or even the crushing, heartbreaking fear. Or perhaps it was because something inside of him had already transitioned into a reality that he had ridiculed throughout his life. All he wanted now was to comprehend. And the rider drew nearer, seemingly noticing this change in Jeff. Not in a physical sense. Intellectually. Let's talk then, Jeff. You, with your sharp intellect. Your words have been sharpened. You are a proud progressive. Your contempt for any religion that failed your own test. It was you who made fun of the elderly man's Bible. For her son, the mom is lighting candle. The man who silently fasted in search of a ray of hope. Didn't you always believe that you were superior? Jeff gritted his teeth and abruptly said, I simply cannot tolerate hypocrisy. Lies irritate me. Those who propagate hate while preaching love. The voice said, and haven't you done the same? Right away. Did you not impose your belief in nothing on other people? Like a zealot proclaiming his gospel, didn't you shout your truth? Didn't you use your intelligence to quiet others? Jeff paused. I never condemned anyone, at least, without word, but with disdain, with your quiet, with your giggling. How many individuals did you influence to doubt their beliefs, not because you were wise, but rather because you made them feel foolish? Jeff's knuckles turned white as his grip tightened on the steering wheel. He wanted to respond, and he did. Because it is weak to use religion as an excuse for suffering, injustice, and poverty. Waiting for a miracle is simpler than taking action. Furthermore, it's simpler to have no beliefs than to face the unknown. It's easier to make fun of than to think. Jeff, you weren't strong. A coward who is simply marching in a different direction. The statements were deeply hurtful. They weren't upset. They lacked emotion. They were accurate. I see. It's true. You protected yourself by using your intelligence. Your reasoning is a weapon. You use your tongue like a hammer. However, Jeff, where are your tools now? Does this car get accelerated? Do they conceal what's about to happen to you? Jeff remained silent. Words could never express what his silence did. I'm here for that reason. You crushed people for having different opinion, not because you thought differently. With your pride, your conceit, your unseen crown. And now, the voice became hardly audible. You'll now have to deal with the suffering you ridicule, the religion you mock. There was no such worry, you said. The hoofbeats then became more audible, nearer. The automobile was no longer being followed. The automobile seemed to have entered the horse's domain, as if Jeff were traveling across the rider's territory. Jeff recognized something terrible while his foot remained firmly planted on the ground, his eyes wide and his heart racing. The rider was correct. He was already defeated, not traveling in his head, within his spirit. What's the worst? Knowing that he would never be the same, even if he managed to get away, was the worst part. Because uncertainty has been vanquished, not by faith, but out of fear, by a truth that had always been there and was now engulfing him. What about the rider? The rider had only just begun. The quiet drew on once more, this time more intense, as if the night itself were holding its breath. Jeff's heartbeat was loud and furious as his hands shook on the steering wheel and his palms were moist with sweat. The road was a whirl of speed and shadows as the engine screamed beneath him, but the feeling of safety had vanished. It didn't. Not even his own thoughts, not even the car. That voice and that presence had made everything vulnerable. Then the laughs started up once again. This time, however, it's different. Playful, cruel, joking. The voice echoed from every corner of the car, crooning, "You look so serious, Jeff. What happened to that pointed tongue? That arrogant reasoning? Already gone. Thank you. Thank you. I had assumed you would endure longer." The temperature abruptly fell, not like the wind, similar to death. His bones, his breath, and the car were all infused with cold. The rear-view mirror broke by itself, and the windows immediately froze over. Jeff turned and froze, blinking. The empty passenger seat has been filled. The rider sat there, leaning back as if he had always been a part of the trip. Tall, wrapped in shadow, where a face should have been, the darkness generated by his wide-brimmed hat smothered it. No eyes, not a feature, just not there. As though steeped in years of rust, the trench coat hung heavy and damp with rotting. Jeff was having trouble breathing. His chest became rigid. His foot froze on the pedal, and his whole body went rigid. Slowly, the rider cocked his head as though he could see Jeff through the gap where eyes should be. Boo! Jeff let out a short, disjointed scream, as though the air had also deceived him. However, the rider merely laughed, amused. "Calm down, Jeff. I'm only having fun." Then he gave a finger snap. The automobile was gone in an instant. Lost. The frame, windows, dashboard, and wheel are all gone as if they never were. After being flung through the air, Jeff's body flipped once and twice before smashing hard onto the chilly asphalt. He scraped his flesh. His ribs hurt. Stunned, he coughed and gasped, rolling. There was nobody on the road. Not a light. Not a sound. Only the thumping truth in his chest and a dense, oppressive cloud. He had secretly hoped that he might succeed, that he would be safe in the car, that he could persevere and live. He thought that the machine's steel, rubber, and glass construction would shield him from anything as mythical as the paranormal. Now, though, he was now vulnerable, naked, at risk, and afraid. He limped to his feet, his palms and temples covered in blood. He emitted ragged clouds of breath. He remained there for a time, his heart pounding and his eyes wide. Then he ran, as though driven by some instinct. Like a man whose soul had just fallen apart, he ran. He heard the laughter behind him once more. More volume, more powerful. Free. "Yes," the rider exclaimed, taking pleasure in it. "Jeff, I like it this way. When they're running, even if they are aware that there is no hope." Something passed through the fog behind Jeff, causing it to divide. Heavy, snarling, bad. He dared not turn around. "Let's add some spice," the rider muttered, and the earth shook. All at once, deep, guttural, and incorrect snarls and barks filled the air. They came out of the shadow. Creatures. Hellhound. There were at least 6 of them, their bodies distorted and enormous, their skin peeling and boiling, their eyes blazing with an unnatural hatred. Their claws broke the ground, their teeth dripped acid, and they moved like hungry shadows. They were heard by Jeff. He sensed them. The air sliced into his lungs like ice as he raced harder, stumbling through the shadowy trees beside the roadway, branches smacking his face. "Jeff, run, run. Look at you now," the rider's voice resounded, this time from inside, below, and above. The rational guy, running like a predator. The God-denying individual, using his feet to prey. Panting and biting his own lip to keep it from quivering, Jeff slipped behind a tree. The world was drowned out by the pounding of his heart. He looked through the trees. The canines were sniffing, looking, hunting. What about the rider? Not a trace in sight, but there was his voice, there at all time. You thought belief made people blind, but it was your doubt that left you naked. Trying to breathe and stop his limbs from shaking, Jeff squeezed his eyes tight. It was all a ruse. It must have been a dream, a breakdown, madness, or advanced virtual reality. Anything but how it felt. However, one of the dogs was staring directly at him as he opened his eye. Still, awaiting. Then it let out a snarl. Low. I'm hungry. The beast crashed through trees behind Jeff as he sprinted again, his eyes widening. It was fire at every step, knives in every breath. However, he persisted since it had now dawned on him that there was no science, logic, or system that could explain this horror. This wasn't merely paranormal. It was a personal matter. What about the rider? He was relishing every moment. Jeff's lungs were scorched. His legs hurt. He was so tired and afraid that his whole body shook. But like a man possessed, or worse, being chased, he continued to move, stumbling through the darkness. He didn't think as he got to the base of a large, twisted tree. He ascended. He grabbed hold of low-hanging branches and dug his ripped hands into the bark, pulling himself up until he was perched 15 feet or more above the ground, his chest heaving and his heart threatening to rip through his ribs. The terrible canines gathered below, circling, tempo. They never left him with their bright glance, as though already within the tree. Their howls reverberated through the wood underneath him. Jeff was panting, his arms were gushing blood, and his side hurt as he held on to the branch. Despite his fear, a human and obstinate part of him was attempting to regain composure. He closed his eyes, breathed slowly. His mind was like a hurricane, but out of it came a question that would not go away. His voice was firm but broken as he said it out loud. If you're not the devil, and you're obviously not God, then what are you? Why are you treating me like this? To anybody? The dogs froze. Then there was silence again. The fog in front of him abruptly lifted like a curtain. With his arms behind his head and his legs crossed, the rider appeared suspended in midair, seemingly resting on unseen nothing. Jeff sensed the stare even if his hat obscured his faceless emptiness. Few ask questions like that, the rider muttered. He spoke less loudly now. It's more intimate, but not less fun. Then, gently, he uncrossed his legs and twisted in midair, his body floating upright until he stood in the dark before Jeff, unsupported. My hatred for proud, ignorant unbelievers like you doesn't come simply from your disbelief, Jeff, he stated quietly. The reason for this is that you don't just stop at not believing. You're intrusive. You make fun of other people's faith. You minimize the paranormal. You eliminate the mystique, swap it out with conceit and disdain, and then reject anything that doesn't originate in your universe. Together, the dogs below snarled and began to pace more quickly and ravenous. You and a lot of other people aren't satisfied with incredulity. You have to kill faith. Jeff's chest rose and fell as he gulped. I understand. I know you said that already, he muttered, suddenly sounding almost desperate. However, what are you? What are you trying to achieve? Why me? Why this? The rider's head tilted a little. Because I was once like you, Jeff, he remarked in a voice as frigid as the emptiness. I was a person. I was also an atheist. Jeff's eyes got bigger. Inside of him, the terror changed, twisted, and assumed a new form. Incredulity, curiosity. The rider went on in a soothing, almost sentimental tone. My previous name was Elthan Richards, a hunter, dreaded in my area, renowned for both my atheism and my fearlessness. I believed I was freeing people from the bonds of faith when I battled against Protestant sermons and Catholic doctrine. Ultimately, the world of sex was quite enjoyable, wasn't it? Sexual relations without repercussion. Battle. Have a drink. All of my pleasures are at my fingertips. As though even the fog remembered, the air seemed to get thicker. But then they arrived. Men, family members of someone I once killed in a bar fight. They desired retribution. I wasn't only shot by them. They brought me along, tortured me. My eyes were torn out. My face was dipped in acid. That night, I passed away. Jeff's pallid cheeks and damaged lip trembled as he gripped the tree branch more tightly. Elthan remarked, "And I expected darkness. I expected the nothingness I preached." A pause. But there was more than just darkness as I opened what was remained of my eye. Two creatures were waiting for me. The mist shifted. The shadow of intolerable evil and a brilliant being of brightness. The carpenter, with his sorrowful expression on one side. The accuser, on the other hand, was giggling as though I had told him the best joke he had ever heard. Jeff's throat became constricted. I was judged before I could even inquire as to what was going on, by the one from whom we all originate, the Creator. He kept his eyes closed. However, his voice rocked the world. The writer then uttered the following in a tremulous, louder voice, emulating celestial mimicry. "Elthan Richards, you have repeatedly denied me. My name has been blasphemed by you. My children have been tainted by your promiscuous and violent lifestyle. You won't be spared." Jeff was unable to turn away, unable to breathe. The accuser then chuckled once again. He added that he also didn't want me. Elthan's voice became icy and resentful. "I wasn't worth the fire," he remarked, "that I would stray, that I would decay here rather than in hell. Ignored, condemned, a lonely soul, adrift in the midst of world." His voice was a murmur of remorse and hatred as he drifted closer. "The same fate has befallen many people before me. Are you familiar with the Brazilian corpo seco? A dried and cursed corpse that would not go to either heaven or hell. That's what I turned into. A spirit full of resentment, not toward God, but toward the living. For people who still have time to waste it changing." Jeff opened his mouth, but remained silent. "Jeff, you have my hatred, not because you're unsure. However, you spit on the truth. For you are what I once was. And just like me, you won't be saved." Snapping his fingers, the rider held up his hand. When the branch beneath him disappeared, Jeff screamed and fell. Pain erupted in his arms, ribs, and spine as he slammed into the earth. The hellhounds lunged before he could even gasp. His arms and legs were grabbed by jaws, which tore and tore as they pulled him across the dirt. His cries reverberated among the wood. "What about the rider?" he observed. "Quiet, Phil." And behind the emptiness, grinning, Jeff's body was a canvas of agony, with his nerves screaming, blood pooling, and skin shredded. He was pulled across the ground like a bag of meat by the teeth of those hellish creatures, which sank into him like hot steel. His cries reverberated into the unending darkness, unadulterated and unrefined, carried by the wind. Nevertheless, instinct took over somewhere in that tempest of pain. He grabbed into the pocket of his ripped jeans with his hardly working right hand, trembling fingers, dripping blood, and he located it. Something little, chilly, known, actual. A knife for the pocket. Jeff opened the blade with the last of his remaining power and, yelling in desperation, drove it into the skull of the closest hound. The blade twisted into tainted bone as it sunk far into its eye. The beast roared in rage and shook furiously. All of a sudden, everything ceased. The other canines went cold. They stopped growling. The tearing, the ripping, the chaos, all of it stopped. Panicked gasps caused Jeff's chest to rise and fall. Uncertain whether what he was seeing was real, he blinked through blood and perspiration. With the knife still embedded in its skull, the wounded dog stood, shaky. When it hit the soil, the thick, black liquid that poured from its eye socket hissed like acid. The beast then let forth a growl. A guttural, deep sound. It lunged in a whirl of movement. Its jaws ripped and snapped around Jeff's arm. As Jeff's right arm was ripped from his body, tendons ripped, the bone broke, and he screamed in agony. He collapsed backward, trembling, his eyes wide with excruciating anguish. However, before the dogs could kill him, enough. It was a hammer-like drop of voice. The atmosphere changed, slowly descending from the fog above. The rider's presence caused the air to become as frigid and jagged as shards of glass. The dogs whimpered and backed off with a single careless snap of his fingers, but Jeff's gaze never left. With boots never touching the ground, the rider moved progressively closer. He glanced down at Jeff, who was now shaking and covered in blood, holding on to his shoulder stump. Then, he gave another snap of his fingers. Jeff let out a gasp. The tissue in his body started to reassemble itself. Skin, muscle, nerve, bone. His fingers twitched with new life as his arm grew back excruciatingly quickly. Only breathless shock remained once the anguish subsided. The rider said, "Run, Jeff," in a strangely serene voice. "We haven't had nearly enough fun yet." At first, Jeff remained still, didn't say anything, didn't consider. Then, like thunder, the growls came back. Once more, the hounds were prepared. Without thinking, Jeff turned and took off running. He ran, his head crashing under the knowledge that this would never end, his heart pounding, his boots stumbling over gravel and root. I didn't wake up from a nightmare. Now this was his life. Furthermore, the discomfort wasn't the worst part. The monsters weren't the cause. Not even the dread was the problem. The rider wasn't attempting to murder him. That was the reality. He was having fun. Jeff's face was streaked with tears as he sprinted across the dirt. The part of him that had once laughed at the thought of spirits and damnation now screamed for his life, for his sanity. He had been mistaken. Tragically, horribly incorrect. Now he was aware. This lasted forever. Before the creatures caught him again, he had not gone very far. Fangs dug into the skin. Bones broke. He tore open his throat. He shouted until his voice vanished, and then he vanished as well. Darkness. Next, light. Then take a breath. Pain. And he was whole once more, lying amid snarling shadows on the same damned dirt. Once more, he ran. And once more. And once more. Tear apart every time. Rebuilt each time. He no longer owned his body. It was part of the torture, to the cycle, to the game. Like a lover of dream, the rider's voice was constantly there, whispering in his ear and smiling softly. "Not just yet, Jeff. We have only just begun." And somewhere, in the recesses of his broken consciousness, Jeff came to the most terrible realization of all. This was not punishment. This was entertainment, and there was no stopping the rider. Jeff had long since lost track of the number of times his body had been disassembled and reassembled. How many times he had come close to death just to come back. And he suffered, until only fatigue and hopelessness remained within him. Hope, escape, and calm were all vanished. Just pain. Until something changed during one of his innumerable runs. He lost them, either by accident from the hounds or by a flash of divine intervention. He discovered a depression in the ground where the shadows did not instantly follow him after slipping past twisted trees and through the fog. He fell to the ground motionless, scarcely breathing, almost lifeless. The dogs had vanished for the time being, but he couldn't stop thinking. Then he thought of her, his mom. Her wrinkled, tear-streaked visage reappeared as existence rather than recollection. He recalled the evenings when he heard her sobbing as he walked by her bedroom door. From hope, not suffer, through prayer. "Please, protect my son. Bring him back. Let him repent before it's too late," she would mutter into the quiet. Jeff's chest constricted. His mouth quivered. He wailed as he lay there in the chilly dirt, shielded from the darkness and animal. This time, though, not out of agony. He did not cry. Real. His soul broke, but his body still shook from anguish and dread. He heard footsteps behind him. Growl. Then came the voice, as crisp as ever but as frigid as ever. "Crying, Jeff?" the rider asked as he came into view. This time, it doesn't sound like pain. Now what? Regret. Amused, he took a step closer. "I already told you, we're not done playing." Jeff shuddered, not only out of dread though. He felt a strange kind of submission swelling within of him, not exactly courage. He did something he never would have imagined doing. He fell to the ground. He lowered his head and raised his arms to the skies gently. Although broken, his voice was steady. "I think I still remember how to do this, even though I only did it as a child." The smile of the rider wavered. Jeff said, "Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name," in a raspy but resolute voice. The rider tensed up. His posture became visibly irritated. "Stop that," Jeff continued. "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done." The rider screamed, "I said stop," and the ground shook with his voice. The dogs growled. They charged after the rider waved their hand. Jeff prepared for discomfort. And then it came, claws tearing apart his back, teeth digging into him. There was blood. "Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses," he said, despite his weeping, gasp, and bloodshed. The agony was excruciating. He continued to pray, nevertheless, "As we forgive those who trespass against us." The rider stopped. Right now, he'd heard plenty of people try, but it wasn't the prayer itself. However, something was different this time. Jeff was not pleading for his life. His prayer was truthful, from the bottom of his heart, from a location the rider had all but forgotten. He held up his hand to launch the hounds once more. "But pause," Jeff muttered, "and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil," as he was covered in blood and had trouble speaking. The rider trembled with anger and clenched his hand. He said, "You think that's going to save you? You think you have salvation?" Jeff, however, continued, "Amen." Quiet, whole. The dogs even halted. The rider then let out a breath. Slowly, he pulled a black, old-fashioned revolver from his coat, anger rising behind invisible eye. Dark energy hissed from the weapon. Jeff's head was the target of his aim. Pressed the trigger. The shot echoed through the empty space. However, nothing. Like fog, the bullet went through Jeff. Then, his injuries started to heal. The blood dried. The skin recovered. They were restoring him, not on his own. The rider didn't do it. By another means. A presence. There was a listener. The carpenter. He had witnessed the reality, the regret, the genuine. Mercy fell for the first time in that location. The rider took a step back, astonished. Then he grinned. "Chilly. I was almost impressed." "You're lucky, kid," he whispered. "You're the first to escape." For the first time, he turned and lowered his head a little. "You should avoid making the same mistakes twice, since I'll be watching now. Always. Jeff, goodbye." His fingers snapped. Then everything became dark. "Jeff, hey, dude, are you all right?" He was drawn out of the depths by the voice. With a gasp, Jeff opened his eye. He lay next to his vehicle, on the side of the road, parked. Dawn was approaching as the sky began to light up in tones of blue and gold. Overhead, the same trucker from the bar was standing, worried. I noticed your car had stopped. I knocked on the window, but you didn't answer, so I assumed you were unconscious." Jeff blinked, gazed at his body below. No blood, no injuries, no discomfort. He was complete. He gently sat up, taking in the crisp morning air as he tried to make sense of what had just transpired. Was it a dream? It wasn't. Everything was genuine. Everything. "Thank you," he said as he turned to face the trucker. With his heart still pounding, he got back in the car and headed down the road. The time on the dashboard was 4:16 a.m. Jeff changed after that day. He never mentioned the incident. He never again made fun of what he couldn't see. His heart warmed. His pride fell silent. He didn't pursue a career in preaching. He did, however, pray silently. Regards. Each and every evening, since he was now aware. Reality itself is not as real as something. However, many people after him and others before him weren't as fortunate. And who is the storyteller? It's Mr. McCabe, that old roadside bar's proprietor. Around 11:34 p.m., passengers stop by, and he shares the story with them. Nobody really knows if it's factual or merely a story told by an elderly Christian man who likes to frighten lonely patrons at a deserted pub. I'm merely recounting what I heard. However, on the other hand, would anyone dare ask? Some say evil hides in faith. Others say it reveals itself in doubt. Whatever side is right, one thing is certain. Some stories refuse to be forgotten. And the next one. It's the kind that makes you look over your shoulder. Ready? Then click and find out.